Hi, welcome to episode 2 of Data Analysis for Complete Beginners, where we're going to be analyzing an HR data set where we're looking at employee retention. So let's get into the problem statement. So the main problem statement is management wants to understand how to reduce employee turnover. HR wants to increase employee retention through a program. Our job as data analysts is to analyze, hypothesize, and create a data story where we communicate the insights that we find through our data analysis. The data set is around 15,000 employees, so we'll have a pretty good data set to analyze in Excel. And our questions for management are, what is the main cause of turnover? Is there something surprising in the data? And you'll hear that a lot as a data analyst. What segment should we focus on? Which department has the highest turnover? And do we need to increase or decrease X? And X may represent something we find in our data set. And lastly, where should we put our pilot program? And we'll be able to answer that through our analysis. So insights, we want to be able to develop insights as data analysts. So we can develop them through the WHW method. What, how, when, why. Those are all things that you can ask to get those insights going. So we want to know what's the goals of the business. Now you might communicate that when you're in a meeting. Of course, the goal of any business is to make money, but in our specific case is to reduce employee churn. And that limits recruitment costs, which are tied to the business goals of making money. What is the metric of success? Employee retention or employee churn can be what we can focus on. What are the trends? For example, which departments have high churn? Which departments have low churn? What influences our metrics and trends? So what other metrics are tied to churn? And how can we fix the trend? That it's another thing that we will have to answer through our analysis. So the tools and techniques that we're going to be using Excel. Of course, we're going to be using PowerPoint to communicate our results. The techniques, pivot tables, Power Query, and DAX. So don't worry, these are really easy things that we can use and utilize, and you'll become familiar with them later on. And statistics like mean, median, sum, count, and percentile. And the visuals that we're going to use probably going to be stacked bar chart, a box plot, funnels, and pie charts. So let's jump over to Excel and start our analysis. So we're in Excel and we have our data here. And our data has certain features. So we know we're looking at an employee data set and we're looking at features per employee. So each one of these lines represents an employee. So the features of our data set are, or the dimensions of our data set are our satisfaction level, the last evaluation, the number of projects, average monthly hours, time spent at the company, work accidents, and left, and that's whether the person has left or stayed at the company, which is designated by a 1 or 0. 1 if they left, 0 if they stayed. Promotions in the last 5 years, also 0 and 1 to indicate whether they had a promotion or didn't. Departments, which are going to be all the departments in the company, and then the salary classification, whether it's low, medium, or high. So the first thing we want to do is create our pivot table. And our pivot table is going to allow us to group that data and aggregate that data the way we want. So what I want you to do is use Insert by just clicking anywhere on your screen, going to Insert. Then we're going to click Pivot Table. We're going to click a new worksheet, but before you hit OK, we want to add this to the data model. If you see this option here, and the reason we're doing that is we want to be able to access some of the features that exist in DAX or Power Query. So the data model allows us to create connections and do some advanced data cleaning through Power Query. We're going to get a little bit into it in this episode. But in this case, we want to be able to use it, and you'll see why in a minute. So make sure you click that option. So we're going to create a pivot table on a new worksheet, and we're going to add it to the data model. So hit OK. Once you've done that, you have your pivot table set up, and you can see we have something called range. That just means we covered the range of our data. And now we can access that table. If we choose to add another table, we will be able to break that table down also. But in this use case, we only have one table. So let's maybe create our first visual. So the first visual I want to create is the churn per department. So let me name this sheet Pivot. And I'm going to create another sheet called Visuals, just so I can have that handy. I'm going to go back over to Pivot, and then in the rows, I'm going to create our department. So if I drag department down to rows, we can see that each one of those rows is indicated by the department. Next, I want to be able to go and get my left, whether the person left or not. And I want to bring that down to values. And that's going to automatically sum those zeros and ones. So the only thing that's going to be added is the 1, which means the person's left. So this is an accurate number of the people who have left per department. But I also want to know how many people exist in each one of those departments. And the way we can do that, we know each line of our data is an employee. So I can grab any one of these dimensions and drag them in. So I'm going to drag in departments. And now I know the total number of employees, whether they left or not, for the departments. So this is a total number, and the percentage of this would be the number who has left. So I'm just going to copy and paste this, the whole thing. And I'm going to go over to visuals, and then I'm going to drop this in. But I don't want to copy as a pivot table, so we're going to Control and Z. We're going to right click, and then we're going to click only values, which is a 1, 2, 3. So I'm going to choose departments, change that name. And we have the sum of left, we have the total number of employees. And now I want to create a churn column, so I'm just going to call that churn. And then I'm going to just divide our people who left over the total employees in that department. And I have a percentage now. So let's drag that down just by double clicking it. And we can see the total churn per department. I am going to highlight all of this, go up to the percentage, and now we have the percentage. And I'm going to make this a little longer by double clicking it to expand it. So we know the overall churn of our company is 24%. And then we can see the highest one is 29%. So let's create a visual. So I'm going to highlight departments just by clicking and dragging this down. I don't want to bring in grand total because it's not a department. I'm going to Control, and then I'm going to left click churn. Now that I have those two columns highlighted without the grand total, I'm going to go over to recommended charts, and I'm going to choose this funnel chart. And I hit OK. Now I have this funnel. It is not very pretty, but we can make it pretty by sorting our data. So I want you to highlight this data without the grand total. Once you've highlighted everything, go to Data, and then there's Sort. I want to sort by churn, and then I want largest to smallest. And I hit OK, and now you can see we have a funnel. So we can see the top 3 departments that have the most churn are HR, which is surprising, accounting, and technical. So this is really telling for us. And we know that they are a few points higher than the average churn of the whole company. So I think this is a great visual to have. I would definitely maybe want to use some contrast, make those top three pop. So let's just quickly do that. I am going to go over to Home, and I'm going to click that. I'm going to turn these gray, maybe light gray or something. And then I'm going to highlight this one, and I'm going to turn that one maybe blue. And this is just showing you how you can quickly contrast what you're looking at. Now we can see that we can have all these. We can highlight and maybe make them bold. Okay, so we have one visual that we can utilize for our employee churn for the top three departments by churn. So now that we have this pivot, I want to look at salary. Now, salary might not be something we can easily build into this because we have to go back to our data and we see salary is categorical. It has different categories. So I'm just going to create another pivot. So I'm going to create a new tab here just by clicking this. And then what I can do is I can go back over to our pivot. I can actually copy this pivot, go back over to my empty pivot, and then just copy and paste, and now I have a new pivot table. So let's call this pivot 2. I have to give it a name different, pivot 2. So we have two pivot tables. I'm going to get rid of the sum of left. And now I have the count of departments. But now what I want to just start fresh. I have departments, and now I want to see the salary range per department. So I can go over to salary. And now remember that this is categorical, so let's make that into columns. So we have high, low, and medium. Now I'm going to go get the salary count by bringing in salary here to values, and we can see those are counted. But I would like to see the percentage by department. So what I can do is click the down caret, go to value settings. I can go to show values as, then it says show values as. I can click this caret. And now we can say, how do we want this to be aggregated? I want the percent of the row total because we have the row that has our low, median, and high and the grand total at the end. So I click that. And now you can see we have a visual. So this would look really nice as a stacked bar chart in our data. So I am going to highlight all of these. I don't need the 100%, but I do want the grand total at the bottom. So highlight, move over, count. So I'm going to Control C, go over to visuals. Now I have another section here. I bring that in, but not as a pivot table. Right click and bring that in as values. So we can see that if we bring this down maybe one little piece, and we turn all of this into percentages by going over to number, going to percent, and doing the same here for grand total, we know that the majority of our, and this doesn't look organized, so what I'm going to do, I am going to highlight this column and reorganize that. So I just move that over. Then I'm going to capture all of medium, including the grand total, bring that over. Then I'm going to highlight both of those and bring them over. So we just reorganize it. Yeah. Now we have a low, medium, and high. So it looks a bit better. So if we look at the order, it's not that organized. I would like it to follow the same ranking here, where we have the rank is by our churn. So what we can do here is let's create a VLOOKUP so we will be able to look at this label and bring in this churn. So I'm going to put churn here also. It's because I want to reorganize this. So I want to reorganize it to rank by churn. So I'm going to go equal and VLOOKUP. And what VLOOKUP is going to do, look up, click that function. So what VLOOKUP is going to do, it's going to look up this value, and I'm going to tell it to look in here for the value, and I want it to find the column in this array or this table. I want it to find 1, 2, 3, and 4. So the fourth column, and then I want it to be exact match. So that is a VLOOKUP. And then I am going to hit enter. And you can see if I turn this into percent, that 27 for accounting is there. So I am just going to pull this down. Oh, and before I pull this down, we need to lock our cells. So if I pull this down, this will go from B4 to B5. So what I want to do is keep this table frozen. And the way we keep that table frozen is function 4. And now you can see those dollar signs on the tables. Now I hit enter, and if I pull this down, that will not move. So now we can sort this table so we have the same ranking that we have here. So now I'm going to capture, let me change this to departments. I'm going to capture this whole table, and I'm going to go to data, going to go to sort, and now I want to sort by churn. I hit largest to smallest, and OK. Now we have the same ranking there. So once you have this, we want to click all our data except churn. We want to go to recommended charts. Let's go to a stacked bar chart and hit OK. Now you can see that the ranking has flipped. Click this visual, click this, right click, format axis, and then categories in reverse in the options. And now we have the same ranking that we have here in this visual with this visual. So it's an easy way to organize the two. I'm just going to quickly turn this into a bigger kind of gap. So you can click on any one of these bars, go to the right, go to gap width, just make the gap smaller and smaller. I click everything, and then I go to data labels. And now you can see we have those labels. I'm going to change them to white, but I don't want to change that to white. So I'm just going to do this individually very quickly. Now we can kind of analyze. Okay, HR, and let's put these next to each other so we can, I'm going to just drag this up here and pull this down. Then I'm going to zoom in a little bit more. So if we look at those top 3 categories, HR, we know HR has the biggest churn, but are people leaving because of low salaries? Well, the low salary is only 6%, and the median salary is 49%. And let's do one other thing. Let's change this legend position so we can click this, go to legend. I'm going to put it at top so we can analyze this. Zoom back in. So if we look at those top 3 categories, we can see that, yes, HR doesn't have a lot of high salaries, only at 6%. So maybe people are leaving because there's no upward propulsion, but a lot of median salaries. Then we can look at the next group, which is accounting. They are the highest churn, second highest churn. They have a high salary of 10% and 47 and 44. So they have kind of a median level, low salary. But if we look at these values, support and sales are in the middle, and they have the highest low salary. And then what we can tell that is very telling, that management, which has the lowest churn, has the most people who have a high salary. So that could be an indicator, but we should keep analyzing. So now we have two charts that we can analyze. So let's continue our analysis where we can look at the penetration of those employees in the company. So I want to create a quick pie chart, which we already have our data here for the count of the department. So I'm just going to highlight the column here and highlight the column here without the grand totals. I'm going to go to Insert, and I'm going to go to Pie Chart. And what I want to be able to do is create a pie chart, because the first question is going to be is like, okay, where should we focus our attention? We have the top three by churn, and we've explored that salary is not a big factor, but it may be a contributing factor, of course. So what we can do is now add our data labels to this and find out how many employees are there by percentage. So I've added my data label there. And I want to go over and format these labels. So I go to click on the labels and I format them. I add percentage and I can take off values. Also, I want my labels outside and I want the category name. So here are our top three. We can still see that HR, accounting, and technical have the highest churn. So if I look at HR, accounting, and technical, and if I wanted to focus my analysis, I'm going to still stick with the top three because the analysis is going to get bigger if we add others. So I am just going to, again, create some contrast. I am going to click on this image, go up to your fill button here, and I'm going to turn those all gray, and I'm just going to highlight this one and make it blue. And that will cover our top three. Now we can use this visual to discuss why we chose to focus on technical and accounting and HR. And now my analysis is getting a little bit more narrow. I believe that if we focus on technical, it will be the best option because technical is a very difficult skill. So users, we're going to have a lot less employee pool to recruit those people. It's also going to be more competitive for HR to find them. So, and it's our biggest share of the top three. So I think this is where we should focus our attention. Now let's evaluate whether these users are working more hours or not. So if I go back over to my pivot, I'm going to bring in average monthly hours. So if I go and I put monthly hours, and then I turn that into an average, we can now remove the decimals by highlighting that column and clicking the arrow key under number. And we can see it's about 201. Technical is actually the highest at 202. But this doesn't really give us a great way to look at hours. What we can do is create a statistical visual on hours. So I'm going to go to my file here. And I'm going to highlight average monthly hours. And I'm going to create a statistical visual called a box plot. So I'm going to hit Insert. I'm going to go over to our histogram here, but I want to go under this and choose box and whisker plot. And what this is going to do is allow us to see all of our data range. So let me add some values here and with the data labels, and I'm going to change this one to white. So you can see we have several numbers here. This is the minimum value that we have for our particular column. This is the minimum amount of hours worked. This is the maximum amount of hours worked. This is, in this box, we are able to see a lot of information. This number is our average, and this is our median. So you can see those numbers are different. And I'm going to show you how to calculate median. This would be our 25th percentile, and this would be our 75th percentile. Now, what do I mean by percentile? That means everything under that marker represents the percent of the data. So if I'm here, 25% of our data is below 156. If I click here, the median, 50% of our data is below this marker. If I choose here, 75% is lower than that. So this is where we're going to be able to create like an outlier measure. So first, let's go back over to our pivot. What you need to do is, because we added this to the data model, we have access to a DAX measure. So I want you to go up to range, right click, and write add measure. Now we're going to be able to write a formula with DAX. And it's very similar to what you see in Excel. So I want the median hours worked monthly. So I'm going to go to median. And then I'm going to go over to hours, average monthly hours. So that's just going to calculate that. So it's a median of the average in a sense. I'm going to click that as a number. And now I am going to give it a name, median hours. And that just shows you how to calculate a median pivot table. So now you can see that's 200 instead of 201. If we go back over to our visual here, we can see that 200 is there. So the reason we are doing this is because now we want to be able to say what percentage of the employees are working long hours. So we can calculate this percentile. So I'm going to create a column called Outlier Hours. Or we can call that outlier hours or high or whatever you like to call it. Then I'm going to go to equals and I'm going to write percentile. Now, any one of these should work between percentile inclusive and exclusive for our data. So now that I have that, I want to get the array, and the array is just our D table. A D column. Then I am going to tell it what the percentile should be. So I'm going to give it the 90th percentile. So that means everything under that level represents 90% of our data. So, and then I click. So everything under 267, which would be somewhere around here, would include 90% of our data. So 267 and below. Now I'm going to change this into a conditional if statement. So I'm going to write if and encapsulate that with parentheses. If this value is greater than our percentile calculation, then give me a 1, else give me a 0. And now we can see that this is average monthly hours is 157, which is far below our number. So now I'm going to just click this, and this will populate. And we can see we have an employee here in sales that is working 272 hours, which is above our 267 percentile number, which represents 90. If we look here, we have another one in sales that is working high hours. So now that we have that, we can bring that into a pivot in this new column. So I'm just going to insert a pivot table. And you see it says table or range. It encapsulates my whole table, including our outlier hours. We don't need to add this to the data model because we already have one, and it will create another one. If I separate this by departments and I bring in outlier hours, you can see we have the sum of the employees that are working outlier hours. If I look at the total employees, we can do a calculation there, which is 78 out of 767. So I'm just going to show you what that looks like. And this is going to give you an indication why we did zeros and ones. So, and if we change that into a percent, it's 10%. And I just want to make sure you see it's exact. So I'm going to create 2 more decimal points. But what we can do here is because we did zeros and ones, and all it's going to do is sum over the total amount. So if I bring outlier hours again as sum, so if now that I bring this in sum, I click the down arrow, I go to value, and then I go to average, and now I turn this into a percent, and let me do 2. You can see we have the same value. The reason is because when you use zeros and ones and then we average, it is just summing and then taking the total amount. So that's a quick shortcut that you can use. So we can see that our numbers align. So I'm going to copy all of this, go to visuals, then I'm going to right click. I'm going to use the 1, 2, 3, which is our just pasting values. I'm going to turn this into a percent. And we can see that technical is helping to prove our point. And department column, which is departments, and then I'm going to change this to outlier hours. So the employees that are working the hardest. And then I'm going to go to insert. I'm going to change this into a bar chart. So I click that and add my data labels. Then I am going to sort this data by going to data, going to sort, and I want to sort by our outlier hours, smallest to largest, and then we can see that this particular technical group is helping to add more information. And definitely we can stylize that by, using contrast. But now as a gut check, let's go back over to your main pivot. And what we can do is just bring in other information. For example, if we bring in last evaluation and we turn that into an average or a median, now that you know the last evaluation. So we can take the average and we can change that to see if there may be some issues in the departments. But these are a lot of different things you can do. So these are pretty standard across the board. We can look at the number of projects and we can take the average or the median, and we can see they're very close on average. I would look at the median also to prove that point. And you know how you can quickly do that. Satisfaction level. At this point, you could bring that in because it's kind of like a knee jerk. Because we know if the department has a lot of churn, it's going to have low satisfaction. So now that we do the average of the satisfaction level for our technical, which is the last one, we can see still that's quite high. So maybe if we change that to median, maybe we would get a different result. So let's just quickly do that. Median. And then we bring in satisfaction level. We give this a name, median satisfaction. Because some people may be super happy and some people may be not happy, and the average may get in the way of that. So let's bring that in. So now we have our new value here, median satisfaction. Look at our table. Now we need to change this to a decimal. So we just highlight that. So change this one so we can see what it is overall. So it's on the lower side. You know, we have a few higher, but it doesn't really give us a lot of information. So now let's go over and create our data story with our visuals. So here's our data story. We've identified 3 segments that have the most churn, which are HR, accounting, and technical. And we see that the company's overall churn is 24%. Then we wanted to know, does salary affect employee retention? To some degree it does, and we can see that in the same ranking that HR, accounting, and technical as those identified 3, they also have a high degree of employees that are in the low and mid salary ranges. And when we talk about the total number of employees per department, we can see if we've identified those top 3 that have the most churn, technical, accounting, and HR. Out of those 3, technical has the highest amount of employees, which is a quite large group. And we would consider that a great candidate for our program due to the fact that recruiting technical employees is quite difficult. We also have identified that out of that technical group, we can see that they have the most amount of working hours. So 11% or more of their employees are working at the 90th percentile or more than 267 hours. So here's our summary. So we know that overall churn sits at 24%. This is far higher than the industry average of 12 to 15%, which I just Googled for Bureau of Statistics. We've identified those 3 candidates for our pilot program. Technical has the greatest number of employees and a 26% churn, while the other 2 that we've identified, which are HR and accounting, they're at 29% for HR and 26% for our accounting group, but they only represent together 10% of our employees. Salary and work hours may factor into department churn, with these segments having the majority of their employees in the low and mid ranges. The technical employees have that 11% of their employees are working more than 267 hours per month. This would be a great candidate for the pilot program, maybe with some work from home options or some different type of organizing their schedules. So this is our analysis. I hope it helped. I hope you can add deeper level analysis here and play around with the data. You know how to create the visuals, you know how to use a pivot table, and now you even know how to use some DAX for your pivot tables and some statistical visuals such as a box plot. Please like and subscribe or leave any comments you want in the comment section. Thank you.